A billionaire drops a ring on the floor. The black waitress who picks it up recognizes it immediately. This belonged to my family. Before we get into this incredible story, take a moment to let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. We love seeing how far these stories travel. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It wasn't a cleansing rain, but a cold, miserable drizzle that seeped into the bones of the small town of Havenwood and seemed to mirror the permanent chill in Ilara's soul. From her post behind the counter of the Greasy Spoon Diner, she watched the water trace sorrowful paths down the large plate-glass window, blurring the world outside into a watercolor of muted grays and browns. The diner's neon sign, with a sputtering "Eat" that flickered like a dying heartbeat, cast a weak, pinkish glow on the wet asphalt. It was a perfect symbol for her hope, intermittent, fading, and barely visible in the gloom. Ilara wiped down the already spotless Formica countertop for the 10th time that hour. The rag was worn thin, much like her patience and the soles of her shoes. She was a widow at 28, adrift in a sea of her late husband's debts. Every cent she earned from slinging coffee and serving lukewarm pie went toward a mountain of obligations that never seemed to shrink. The diner, once a place of bustling small-town life, was now just a station in her Sisyphean routine. Work, go home to an empty, cold apartment, stare at a stack of red-stamped envelopes, sleep for a few restless hours, and return to do it all again. Tonight was especially slow. Only Mrs. Gable, the town's primary source of gossip and judgment, occupied a corner booth, nursing a single cup of coffee for 2 hours, while her sharp eyes missed nothing. Ilara could feel the weight of that gaze, a constant, silent critique of her worn uniform, her tired expression, her very presence in a town that had never fully accepted her. The bell above the door chimed, a tinny, startling sound in the quiet room. A man stood there, shaking a fine wool overcoat that was likely worth more than Ilara's entire yearly income. He was tall and impeccably dressed, with silver hair swept back from a face that looked as if it were carved from granite. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue, scanned the room with an unnerving intensity, dismissing Mrs. Gable's curious stare and landing squarely on Ilara. He moved with a quiet, powerful grace, taking a seat at the counter. The worn vinyl stool seemed to protest under the weight of his expensive suit. "Coffee," he said, his voice a low baritone, smooth but devoid of warmth. "Black." Ilara nodded, her movements practiced and efficient. As she poured the dark, steaming liquid into a thick ceramic mug, she felt an unfamiliar prickle of anxiety. This man was different. He wasn't a local, nor was he a lost tourist. He seemed to belong to another world, one of boardrooms and leather-bound, books, not sticky countertops, and the smell of stale grease. She placed the mug before him, her hand trembling almost imperceptibly. He didn't thank her. He simply stared into the black liquid as if searching for an answer. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the hum of the old refrigerator and the relentless drumming of the rain. The inciting incident had arrived, not with a bang, but with the quiet closing of a door, letting in a man who would change everything. He drank his coffee in slow, deliberate sips, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the rain-streaked window. Ilara busied herself, refilling salt shakers and arranging napkins, acutely aware of his presence. There was an aura of immense stillness about him, the kind that precedes a storm. After several long minutes, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a slim leather wallet. As he did, something small and metallic slipped from his grasp, falling to the checkered linoleum floor with a soft, almost inaudible clink. Ilara saw it instantly, a glint of gold near the base of his stool. Her first instinct, born of a lifetime of quiet integrity, was to retrieve it for him. It would have been easy to pretend she hadn't seen it. The man was wealthy. He probably wouldn't even miss it. The thought was a bitter whisper in her mind, a temptation born of desperation. The eviction notice on her door felt like a physical weight on her chest. The money from pawning a gold ring could buy her another week, maybe 2. It could mean keeping the lights on. It could mean a full meal instead of the half-eaten customer leftovers she sometimes took home. But the thought was as fleeting as it was ugly. Her grandfather, Joe, had raised her after her parents passed. His voice, warm and steady, echoed in her memory. "Dignity, Ellie girl. It's the one thing they can't take from you unless you give it away." She pushed the thought aside, her jaw tightening with resolve. She bent down, her knees creaking in protest, and her fingers closed around the object. It was a man's signet ring, heavy and solid. As she straightened up, intending to place it on the counter, her thumb brushed across the engraved face. She stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart began to pound a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. She turned the ring over in her palm, her calloused fingers tracing the familiar, intricate design. It was a stylized heron, its wings outstretched, with a tiny, perfect star etched just above its head. A deep, guttural sound, something between a gasp and a sob, escaped her lips. The sound was loud enough to draw a sharp, irritated glance from Mrs. Gable in the corner. The man at the counter finally turned his head, his piercing blue eyes fixing on her. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" he asked, his tone still perfectly level. Ilara looked up from the ring, her own dark eyes swimming with a confusing storm of emotions. Grief, disbelief, a sudden white-hot flare of anger. The face of the ring was not just a design, it was a story. It was the story of her grandfather, a master carpenter who had designed and carved that very heron into every piece of furniture he ever made. He had worn this ring every day of his life. It had been buried with him. "This," she began, her voice cracking. She cleared her throat, forcing the words out. "Where did you get this?" She held it out on her flattened palm, the gold seeming to burn against her skin. "This ring, it belonged to my family." The man's granite expression remained unchanged, but a flicker of something, surprise, interest, danced in the depths of his eyes. He didn't answer her question. He simply looked from the ring in her hand to her face, his gaze analytical, as if he were solving a complex puzzle. The air in the diner grew thick with unspoken history. For Ilara, the world had suddenly tilted on its axis. This wasn't just a lost object. It was a ghost. A piece of her past she thought was gone forever. Now sitting in the palm of her hand in this dingy diner on the worst night of her life. Before the stranger could respond, the bell over the door chimed again, this time with a jarring, aggressive clang. A portly man in a cheap, damp suit entered, shaking rain from his shoulders like a wet dog. Mr. Henderson, the debt collector. A knot of pure dread tightened in Ilara's stomach. He ignored the wealthy man at the counter, his piggy eyes zeroing in on Ilara with predatory glee. "Well, well, Ilara," he said, his voice slick with false sympathy. "Working hard, I see. Or hardly working." He chuckled at his own terrible joke. Mrs. Gable leaned forward in her booth, her face alight with malicious curiosity. This was better than her soap operas. "Mr. Henderson," Ilara said, her voice barely a whisper. She instinctively closed her hand around the ring, hiding it from view. This isn't the time or the place. Oh, I think it's the perfect time, he sneered, pulling a sheaf of papers from his briefcase. He slapped them down on the counter, the sound echoing in the tense silence. Your late husband, bless his soul, left quite a mess. A mess you've done a very poor job of cleaning up. You're 3 months behind. The bank's patience has officially run out. This is a final notice of foreclosure on the apartment. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial, cruel hiss. You have 48 hours to pay the full balance, or you and your things will be on the street. Maybe the rain will wash some of the bad luck off you. Humiliation washed over Ilara in a hot, sickening wave. Her cheeks burned. She could feel Mrs. Gable's stare, feel her smug satisfaction. She could feel the cold, assessing gaze of the stranger beside her. She felt stripped bare, her private suffering turned into a public spectacle. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with a deep, impotent rage. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to tell Henderson what a parasite he was, but she couldn't. She just stood there, trapped and silent, the weight of it all pressing down, threatening to crush her completely. The stranger at the counter slowly turned his head, his unreadable blue eyes moving from Henderson's triumphant smirk to Ilara's pale, devastated face. He had seen everything. Mr. Henderson, satisfied with his performance, gave a final dismissive sniff and turned to leave. 48 hours, Ilara. The clock is ticking. He pushed the door open and vanished back into the miserable night, leaving a puddle of dirty rainwater and a profound silence in his wake. For a moment, no one moved. The only sounds were the spattering rain and the stuttering buzz of the neon sign. Mrs. Gable was practically vibrating with the fresh gossip she had to spread. Ilara stared at the wet papers on her counter, each word a nail in the coffin of her life in Havenwood. The ring felt heavy and cold in her clenched fist. Joe Peterson was your grandfather. It wasn't a question. The stranger's voice cut through the thick atmosphere, calm and certain. Ilara looked up, startled. Tears she hadn't realized were forming now threatened to spill over. She could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. He was a good man, the stranger continued, his tone softening for the first time. An honest man. He saved my life once, a long time ago. I was just a boy, foolish and reckless. Fell through the ice on Miller's Pond. He pulled me out, wrapped me in his own coat, and carried me 2 miles back to town. He looked down at his own hands, then back at Ilara. My family was wealthy, but we had no real roots, no honor. Your grandfather had nothing, but he was the richest man I ever knew. When I was older, I came back to thank him properly. He refused any money. He said, "Kindness isn't a debt to be paid, son. It's a seed to be planted." But he let me give him a gift, a token. I had this ring made for him, a copy of one my own father wore, but with his heron on it. He paused, his gaze intense. I made him a promise. I told him if his family ever needed anything, I would be there. He made me swear I would find them. He gave me the ring back that day and said, "If you ever see this ring again, it means the promise is due." I've been looking for his family for years. My name is Alistair Sterling. The name meant nothing to Ilara, but a fragile, impossible tendril of hope began to unfurl in her chest. A story, a promise. It felt like something from a fairy tale, too fantastic to be real in her gritty, desperate world. From the corner booth, a sharp, cynical voice piped up. Humph. Likely story. Mrs. Gable muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Looks to me like she's trying to spin some sob story to swindle a rich man. Probably palmed that ring herself. The accusation was like a slap in the face. All the fight that had been drained from Alara surged back. "I would never," she said, her voice low and shaking with fury. She turned to Mr. Sterling. "I don't know who you are, sir, but this ring belonged to my grandfather. I saw him put it in his own pocket before the funeral. I don't know how you came to have it, but I am not a thief and I am not a liar." Mr. Sterling ignored Mrs. Gable completely. He reached into his jacket and produced a checkbook and a pen. He scribbled something quickly, tore out the check, and pushed it across the counter toward Alara. It was blank, signed with a confident, authoritative flourish. Alistair Sterling. "Tell me what it will take to solve your problems," he said, his voice even. "Write any number you want on that check. It will be honored." This was the final test. Alara looked at the blank check, a magical piece of paper that could erase all her problems, buy her a new life, give her everything she'd ever dreamed of. She could write $1 million, 10 million. The possibility was dizzying. For a second, she allowed herself to imagine it. The look on Henderson's face, a warm home, a future free from fear. But then she looked at the ring, still clutched in her other hand. She thought of her grandfather's words about dignity. Taking this money felt like a betrayal of his memory, an admission that her integrity was for sale. She pushed the check back across the counter. "No," she said, her voice clear and firm, all trembling gone. "I appreciate the offer, sir, truly. But my grandfather taught me to earn my own way. His kindness wasn't a transaction, and neither is mine. I don't want your money." She finally opened her hand and placed the heavy gold ring on the counter next to the check. "I just want to understand, and I want a chance to fix my own life." A slow smile spread across Alistair Sterling's face, transforming his severe features. It was like the sun breaking through the clouds. He had seen what he came to see. He had found Joe Peterson's legacy, not in a bloodline, but in a character that could not be bought. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said softly. He picked up his phone from the counter, his thumb moving deftly across the screen. He put it to his ear. "Michael," he said, his voice dropping into a register of command that was absolute. "I'm in a town called Havenwood. I need you to handle a few things. First, there's a debt collector named Henderson, works for Midwest Financial. I want his company acquired. All outstanding debts for a woman named Alara Jackson are to be forgiven, effective immediately, and issue a formal apology for harassment." Alara's jaw dropped. Mrs. Gable's coffee cup clattered in her saucer. "Second," Sterling continued, his eyes never leaving Alara's, "find out who owns the Greasy Spoon Diner on Main Street. Buy it, at any price. Put the deed in Mrs. Jackson's name. Start a fund for renovations and cover all operating expenses for the first year. And finally, get the jet ready. I'm bringing someone home." He hung up. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the steady rhythm of the rain, which suddenly seemed less like a lament and more like applause. The next 40 minutes were a blur. Just as Sterling was finishing a second cup of coffee, which Alara poured with a shaking hand, the diner door opened again. It was Mr. Henderson, but he was a changed man. His face was ashen, his usual bluster completely gone. He was flanked by two stern-looking people in dark suits who could only be lawyers. "Mrs. Jackson," Henderson began, his voice quivering as he stumbled over the name. There's been a terrible misunderstanding, a clerical error. He wrung his hands, refusing to look at Sterling. Your accounts, they've been reviewed. All outstanding balances have been cleared, wiped, in full. We are so terribly sorry for any distress our aggressive tactics may have caused. He practically bowed before scurrying out of the diner, his new companions right on his heels. Not 10 minutes later, Mr. Gable, the diner's perpetually grumpy owner, shuffled in, holding a portable phone. "Ilara, you won't believe this," he stammered, his eyes wide. "Some big-shot lawyer just called. Offered me 5 times what this place is worth. In cash. Said the sale was non-negotiable and the new owner wanted you to have the keys." He dangled the keys from his finger, looking from Ilara to Sterling in utter bewilderment. "They're yours. The place is yours." Ilara sank onto a stool, her legs giving way. Her diner, debt-free. It was impossible. She looked at Alistair Sterling, the man who had orchestrated this miracle with a single phone call. "Your grandfather didn't just save me from a frozen pond, Ilara," Sterling said gently, his voice filling the now sacred space of the diner. "He taught me what a man should be. My father was a tyrant who built an empire on ruthlessness. Your grandfather built a life on kindness. After he passed, I lost the trail. I hired investigators, but it was like your family vanished. I started visiting small towns, run-down diners like this, showing the ring, hoping someone, somewhere, would recognize it, hoping to find the seed he planted." His eyes shone with a moisture that mirrored Ilara's. "I found it. It's you." The news spread through Havenwood like wildfire. Mrs. Gable had fled the diner in shame, but not before telling half the town what she'd witnessed. People who had looked through Ilara for years now looked at her with awe and respect. She wasn't the poor, downtrodden widow anymore. She was the woman who had been rewarded for her quiet, unyielding virtue. She was the heir to Grandpa Joe's legacy of kindness. Alistair Sterling became a regular fixture for a while, not as a billionaire, but as a mentor and a friend. He helped her plan the renovations, sharing stories of her grandfather she'd never heard. A new family was being forged in the heart of the old diner, one built on a promise kept across decades. 6 months later, the greasy spoon was gone. In its place stood Grandpa Joe's kitchen. The flickering neon was replaced by a warm, welcoming sign carved from polished oak, a proud heron spreading its wings over the name. Inside, the sticky vinyl and cracked formica were gone, replaced by sturdy, beautiful wooden tables and booths, all handmade by a local carpenter Ilara had hired. The diner was always full now, buzzing with laughter and conversation. Ilara moved with a newfound confidence, not just as a waitress, but as the owner, the heart of the establishment. She hired others who were down on their luck, giving them the same chance she had been given. She was planting seeds. One evening, during a lull, she stood looking out the same large window. The rain was falling again, but it no longer felt sorrowful. It felt cleansing, washing the streets clean, making the lights of her diner sparkle. Around her neck, on a simple gold chain, hung the signet ring. It was a constant reminder not of what she had been given, but of what she had refused to give away. It was a reminder that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the quiet, unwavering strength of the human heart. If this story touched your heart, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Kindness, after all, is the only investment that never fails to pay dividends.